San Diego punk rock trio Blink-182 are probably best remembered for their crass behavior and for their willingness to inject a healthy dose of potty humor into the world of popular music. They also just so happen to be one of the pioneering and defining punk rock acts of a generation. Now, before we get into the legendary band that is Blink-182, I just don't think it's fair that I mess up every single pronunciation in every video, so I figured why not share the bullying and call in some help. One of our very talented editors and host, Christine, is going to fill you guys in. I'll see you guys at the end.
After their breakthrough with 1999's Enema of the State and transformation into one of the biggest musical acts in the world, a lengthy hiatus would eventually follow, only for these former friends to reunite with a surprising willingness to explore more mature topics. But their reunion wouldn't last. What do UFOs, a tragic plane crash, and a life-threatening cancer diagnosis have to do with all of this? I have no idea. But keep watching Where Are They Now to find out. Blink-182 didn't intend to kick off the trend of rock bands attaching seemingly meaningless numbers to their names. It just kind of happened that way. The original lineup featuring bassist/singer Mark Hoppus, as well as guitarist/singer Tom DeLonge, and drummer Scott Raynor tried out names like Duct Tape and Figure 8 before finally settling on one simple word: Blink. This name managed to stick around through the early garage practices, late-night songwriting sessions, and early club appearances. Heck, it's even the name they go by on their OG cassette tape 1994's Buddha. But by their follow-up album Cheshire Cat, they had to revisit their name because, as it turns out, there just so happened to be an Irish band that used the same name first and was threatening to sue. When their label Cargo Music put up a fuss and refused to go to war over the name, the band was told to just change it. So someone decided to slap a 182 to the end of Blink, and the rest was history.
When we're in Europe or the UK, they're always saying Blink 182.
But it is Blink 182. It's not 182, because otherwise you'd say 182.
Yeah, and that would sound really weird.
Cheshire Cat would then feature two of the band's earliest success stories, Carousel and M+Ms, which emboldened the members to ditch Cargo Music, who they felt didn't have their best interests at heart. The problem was, no one seemed to be able to agree on who they should sign with next. Their drummer Scott had an affinity for Epitaph Records, but Mark and Tom would overrule him and decide that the band should sign with MCA. Unfortunately, this decision rubbed Scott the wrong way. He'd ultimately wind up being fired during the middle of their Dude Ranch tour, reportedly for alcohol abuse. Thankfully, the boys just happened to be touring with another band called the Aquabats at the time, so Mark and Tom reached out to their drummer, a young man named Travis Barker, and asked if he'd be willing to perform with them on stage. Travis learned the necessary songs in less than an hour, rocked out, and right then and there, the real Blink-182 was born. As it would turn out, Scott couldn't have picked a worse time to leave, because when Enema of the State dropped the following year, Blink-182 would officially become one of the biggest bands in the world. This landmark album would go on to sell a staggering 15 million copies worldwide and become the defining album of the pop-punk rock genre, earning its spot as one of the most influential albums ever made.
The word enema was an unusual choice to swap out with enemy. Was that because you were passionate about the enema?
Not me, but while we were recording that album, Tom went to the grocery store and got one.
Blink-182 became such a cultural force that their follow-up album, 2001's Take Off Your Pants and Jacket, sold almost as many copies as Enema of the State did, with 14 million records. But soon, after the release of this album, things would begin to go south. Now that Mark, Tom, and Travis were all pushing their 30s and had even become fathers, their priorities subtly began to shift. Tom became torn between the band and his desire to grow creatively. Thus, he formed a short-lived project with Travis called Boxcar Racer. Considering 2/3 of the band decided to create something without him, Mark was feeling understandably slighted, and his friendship with Tom, which to that point had been extremely close, took a huge hit. Despite the mounting drama and conflicting agendas that were taking place internally, the trio put everything to the side to record their self-titled album, 2003's Blink-182. But with Tom's desire to move further away from the band's trademarked pop-punk tone and comedic lyrics to pursue heavier and more experimental sounds, the recording sessions were extremely tense. Despite the behind-the-scenes drama, when the album dropped, critics and fans adored this newer, more mature version of one of their favorite bands. It might not have reached the sales milestones of their previous efforts, but the single I Miss You was one of their biggest ever and offered the promise of newer and better things to come. Only Blink-182's rabid fan base wouldn't get to hear what came next, at least not for a very long time, because in February of 2005, Blink-182 officially announced an indefinite hiatus. At this point, Tom was suffering from debilitating back pain, and he desperately wanted some time off to recuperate and be with with his family. With the release of their latest album already underway, Mark and Travis pushed back. Unwilling to choose his band over his health and family, Tom pulled out and the future of the band was up in the air. Mark and Travis would wind up re-teaming to form a new pop-punk band known as Plus 44, but their debut album When Your Heart Stops Beating was released to mixed reviews and paltry sales numbers. Meanwhile, after healing up, Tom would re-emerge as the frontman for the alternative rock band known as Angels and Airwaves. While that project was decidedly more successful than Plus 44, none of the Angels and Airwaves records could touch the Blink-182 sales numbers. Then, over the next few years, things would really begin to go off the rails. Mark began to feel creatively lost while Travis took a detour into the world of reality TV with his wife, Shauna Moakler, becoming a fixture of the tabloids.
Having a reality show meant like there was like 50 cameras in our house.
Yeah, it was different then.
And there was like camera crews living with us. It was a trip. And these people would wake up and I'd be cooking breakfast and I'd be in my boxers and there was some dude with a camera. It was so crazy.
It would take two tragedies to bring these three men back together. First, their good friend and producer Jerry Flynn died of a sudden cerebral hemorrhage in August of 2008 at only 39 years old. Second, Travis was involved in a deadly plane crash that he only just barely managed to survive. He would spend weeks in the hospital fighting third-degree burns and PTSD, at times asking those closest to him to euthanize him because he was in so much pain. When Tom and Mark would visit Travis in the hospital, it became the very first time these three men spent any time together in years. Once Travis was eventually discharged, they stayed in touch and eventually met up in the Barker studio where they had two heart-to-heart sessions in which they cleared the air. By the end, all three men had decided to get the band back together and return to doing what they loved most. Blink-182 would officially announce their reunion at the 2009 Grammy Awards and then embark on a star-studded tour featuring those very same bands they helped pave the way for. Acts like Fall Out Boy, All American Rejects, and Panic at the Disco.
Isn't it great to see the Jonas Brothers and Stevie Wonder back together again?
We used to play music together, and we decided we're going to play music together again.
Blink-182 is back!
The following year, they were in the studio recording their newest album, Neighborhoods. Without Jerry at the helm to produce, the boys decided to do it themselves. And this would prove to be their downfall yet again. The lack of structure resulted in repeated postponements of the release, and eventually tensions began to resurface. They did their best to work around one another's busy schedules, but Tom would later admit that during the vast majority of recording, we weren't even in the same room. We were barely talking. We were in different studios. Everyone was on eggshells. When Neighborhoods was finally released, critics praised it, but fans were more hesitant to embrace the darker tone and the lack of any standout pop-punk anthems. The album debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200, but then quickly fell off. Despite the rocky start this reunion was off to, the boys continued to tour throughout the early part of last decade. But behind the scenes, Tom was once again distancing himself from the others. A brief cancer scare sidelined him for a time, but primarily his interest kept getting pulled in more frantic directions, specifically his fascination with UFOs. Then in 2014, Tom's manager informed Mark and Travis that Delonge was leaving the band to pursue non-musical interests. Rather than break up again, Mark and Travis decided to carry on without Tom and replace him with Alkaline Trio guitarist and singer Matt Skiba. Soon after, this new iteration of Blink-182 dropped California, which would become the band's first #1 hit on the Billboard 200 since 2001. Heck, it even earned them their first Grammy nomination for Best Rock Album, if you can believe that. 3 years later, 9 would become their latest album to see release, but it didn't manage to recapture the sales magic of California. As for Tom, well, he's continued with Angels and Airwaves, but the majority of his time is now invested in his UFO project to the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences, which is an ongoing venture which merges various artistic endeavors with aerospace engineer experiments and UFO secrets. No, seriously, this is a thing, and honestly, that sounds really cool.
By the time To the Stars became To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, I was very aware. I was like, when we do this stuff, maybe their resumes will help people not be so vicious on something that's so controversial. And I also remember, like, well, you know what? That's kind of what my role is. I will stand out in the front and take all the arrows for these guys.
Meanwhile, Mark has also recently opened up about his own battle with large B cell lymphoma. He first revealed his cancer diagnosis in June, and ever since then, both Travis and Tom have been showing him as much support as possible across social media. In a great turn of events, just last month, Mark revealed that the chemotherapy is doing its job, and before long, he hopes to be completely cancer-free. That's what we like to hear.
Will this close call end up sparking the original trio of Blink-182 members to re-team yet again? Well, we'll have to wait and see. This was also Christine's very first video hosting, so let her know how she did in the comments down below. And I think she did a great job, so please just be nice. My name is Clyde Smith. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and I will see you guys in another video.